was just a clerk. A single drawer jammed and everything changed. A hidden file revealed names, crimes, and a deadly secret not meant for her eyes. When the detective found her, his words were chilling. "Now you know too much." But what came next? No one could have predicted. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The autumn rain fell in steady sheets across Boston's cobblestone streets, turning the gas lamps into hazy amber orbs in the gathering dusk of October 1898. Miss Catherine Hayes pressed herself against the brick wall of the narrow alley, her heart hammering beneath the layers of her burgundy traveling dress. The leather satchel clutched to her chest felt impossibly heavy, though it contained nothing more than papers that had just turned her entire world upside down. She had not meant to find them. That was the truth she would cling to if anyone asked, though she suspected no one would believe her now. Catherine had simply been doing her job as a filing clerk at the prestigious law firm of Morrison and Blackwell, organizing the dusty archives in the basement as Mr. Morrison had requested. But when the old cabinet drawer had stuck, and she had pulled harder than intended, it had come loose entirely, spilling its contents across the stone floor. Among the scattered documents, one folder had fallen open, revealing a heading that made her blood run cold. Confidential, Harbor Development Contract, Political Contributions Ledger. Catherine was no fool. She had worked in Boston's legal district long enough to understand that some documents were never meant to see daylight. But curiosity, that dangerous companion, had compelled her to read further. What she discovered in those meticulous columns of numbers and names was a web of corruption that reached into the highest levels of the city's government. Bribes, falsified reports, contracts awarded not to the most qualified builders, but to those who paid the most generously into certain private accounts. She should have closed the folder immediately, should have returned it to its hiding place and forgotten everything she had seen. Instead, Catherine had done something far more reckless. She had taken it. Now, as the rain soaked through her wool coat and the October chill seeped into her bones, she wondered if she had just made the worst decision of her 26 years. The streets around her were emptying as respectable folk hurried home to their warm parlors and hot suppers. Catherine knew she should do the same, return to her modest boarding house on Beacon Hill, but fear kept her frozen in place. What if someone had seen her leave the office with the satchel? What if Mr. Morrison had already discovered the missing file? "Miss, are you quite all right?" The voice startled her so badly that Catherine nearly dropped her burden. She spun around to find a tall gentleman standing at the mouth of the alley, his broad shoulders outlined against the lamp-lit street beyond. He wore a well-tailored charcoal coat and a dark bowler hat, beneath which she could just make out strong, handsome features and eyes that seemed to assess her with professional concern. Yes, I am perfectly well, thank you," Catherine managed, though her voice betrayed her agitation. She took a step backward, deeper into the shadows. The gentleman did not retreat. Instead, he moved closer, and Catherine noticed he walked with the careful, balanced gait of someone trained in physical confrontation. Her alarm intensified. "Forgive me, miss, but you appear distressed. This is not a safe neighborhood for a lady alone after dark. May I escort you somewhere? Perhaps call a hansom cab?" There was something in his voice, a warmth beneath the formal courtesy, that made Catherine hesitate. She studied him more carefully now. He was perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair visible beneath his hat, and a face that combined strength with an unexpected gentleness. His eyes, she noticed, were a striking gray blue, like the Atlantic before a storm. They held intelligence, and something else she could not quite name. Integrity, perhaps. "That is very kind, sir, but I can manage on my own," Catherine said, though even as she spoke, she was acutely aware of how vulnerable she was. The weight of the stolen document seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. The gentleman studied her for a long moment, and Catherine had the unsettling sensation that he could see right through her carefully maintained composure. Then he reached into his coat pocket, and Catherine tensed, preparing to run. But he merely extracted a calling card, which he extended toward her. "Detective James Thornton, Boston Police Department," he said quietly. "If you find yourself in any difficulty, miss, please do not hesitate to contact me. Something tells me you may need assistance before this evening is through." Catherine stared at the card in his gloved hand as if it were a snake. A police detective. Of all the people to encounter in this moment, fate had delivered her a representative of the very institution that might soon be hunting her. Yet something in Detective Thornton's expression made her reach out and accept the card. Their fingers brushed briefly through their gloves, and Catherine felt an unexpected spark of connection that had nothing to do with fear. "Thank you, Detective," she whispered, tucking the card into her coat pocket. "But I assure you, I require no assistance." James Thornton's expression suggested he did not believe her for a moment, but he was too much of a gentleman to press the matter. He tipped his hat courteously. "Then I wish you a safe journey home, miss. But if I may offer one piece of advice, whatever trouble you may have stumbled into, secrets have a way of becoming heavier the longer we carry them alone." Before Catherine could formulate a response, the detective had turned and walked back toward the main street, his tall figure disappearing into the rain-soaked evening. She stood motionless for several minutes after he had gone, her mind racing. How had he known? What had she revealed in her manner or expression that had telegraphed her distress so clearly? Catherine finally forced herself to move, stepping out of the alley and onto the glistening cobblestones. She needed to think, to plan her next move carefully. The boarding house was out of the question now. If someone came looking for her, that would be the first place they would search. She needed somewhere safe, somewhere unexpected. Her feet carried her almost of their own volition through the winding streets of Boston's commercial district. The rain continued its relentless assault, and Catherine was thoroughly soaked by the time she reached her destination, the Boston Public Library. The grand building stood like a fortress of knowledge against the stormy sky, its windows glowing with welcoming light. Inside, Catherine found herself in the warm, book-scented sanctuary of the main reading room. Only a handful of patrons remained at this late hour, most absorbed in their studies and taking no notice of the bedraggled young woman who had just entered. Catherine chose a corner table partially concealed behind a row of tall bookshelves, and finally allowed herself to sit. Her hands trembled as she opened the satchel and withdrew the damning folder once more. In the better light of the library's electric lamps, the full scope of the corruption revealed itself in even starker detail. The document detailed a conspiracy to defraud the city of Boston in the construction of a new harbor facility. Inferior materials would be used while payments were made for superior ones, with the difference pocketed by a network of city officials, contractors, and, Catherine's stomach turned, several prominent lawyers, including her own employer, Marcus Morrison. But it was the final page that truly terrified her. It was a list of names under the heading Problematic Parties, addressed. Catherine recognized several names from newspapers over the past 2 years. A harbor inspector who had died in what was ruled an accidental fall from a dock. A city accountant whose house had burned down while he slept. A journalist who had vanished without a trace. Catherine's hands shook so violently that she nearly tore the page. These people had not died by accident. They had been murdered because they had known too much, asked too many questions, threatened to expose the conspiracy, and now she had stumbled upon the same deadly secret. Researching something particular this evening? Catherine's head snapped up so quickly she felt a sharp pain in her neck. Standing beside her table as if he had materialized from thin air was Detective James Thornton. He had removed his hat, revealing thick, dark hair slightly dampened by rain, and his gray-blue eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Detective Thornton," Catherine breathed, unconsciously pulling the folder closer to her chest. "How did you follow you?" He finished, gently pulling out the chair across from her and sitting without invitation. "Forgive the intrusion, miss. I do not believe I caught your name." "Hayes, Catherine Hayes." She supplied her name automatically, then immediately regretted it. Now he knew who she was. Now she could be traced, identified, added to that terrible list of problematic parties. "Miss Hayes," James said, his voice low and measured, "I have been a detective for 8 years. In that time, I have learned to recognize fear when I see it. The kind of fear that comes not from immediate physical danger, but from knowledge. Dangerous knowledge." His eyes dropped briefly to the folder clutched in her arms. "What have you found?" Catherine's mind raced through her options. She could lie, claim the folder contained nothing more than personal correspondence or work documents. She could flee, though she suspected Detective Thornton would not allow her to leave so easily. Or she could take a leap of faith, trust in the integrity she thought she had seen in his eyes, and tell him the truth. "If I tell you," she whispered, "will you promise to hear me out completely before you make any judgments?" Something shifted in James Thornton's expression, a softening, a opening. "You have my word as a gentleman and an officer of the law." Catherine took a deep breath, sent a silent prayer to whatever powers might be listening, and slid the folder across the table toward him. "Then you should read this, detective, because I believe I have just stumbled upon evidence of a conspiracy that involves some of the most powerful men in Boston, and I think they will kill me if they discover what I know." James opened the folder and began to read. Catherine watched his face carefully, noting how his expression grew progressively darker with each page he turned. His jaw tightened. A muscle worked in his temple. When he reached the final page, the list of names, his hands clenched so tightly on the paper that she feared he might tear it. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James looked up at her. His eyes blazed with an emotion Catherine could not quite identify. Anger, certainly, but also something that looked remarkably like admiration. "Miss Hayes," he said slowly, carefully, "do you understand what you have here?" "Evidence of murder and corruption," Catherine replied. "Evidence that could bring down half the city's government if it were to become public." "Yes," James agreed, "and evidence that makes you the most dangerous woman in Boston, because now you know too much." The words hung between them like a death sentence. Catherine had known this, of course, from the moment she had read that terrible list of names, but hearing it spoken aloud by a police detective made it impossibly, terrifyingly real. "What do I do?" Catherine asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. James was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving hers. When he finally spoke, his words were not what Catherine had expected. "You trust me," he said simply. "You allow me to help you. Because if we are very careful and very clever, Miss Hayes, we might just be able to use this information to bring these men to justice. But it will be dangerous. It will require courage, and you will need to follow my instructions precisely. Can you do that?" Catherine met his gaze steadily, seeing in those storm-blue eyes a determination that matched her own. She thought of the names on that list, people who had died because they had tried to do the right thing. She thought of the corruption eating away at her city like rot in the foundation of a grand building. And she thought of this man, this detective who had appeared like Providence in her darkest hour, offering not judgment but partnership. "Yes," Catherine said firmly. "Yes, I can do that." James Thornton smiled then, and it transformed his serious face entirely, revealing warmth and humor and something that made Catherine's heart skip in a most unexpected way. "Then, Miss Hayes," he said, rising from his chair and offering her his hand, "our investigation begins tonight. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. I know a place where no one will think to look for you. Will you come with me?" Catherine placed her hand in his, feeling the strength and steadiness in his grip, even through their gloves. She did not know this man, had met him less than an hour ago under the most inauspicious circumstances. By all reasonable standards, she should not trust him. But sometimes, Catherine reflected, faith required a leap into the unknown. "I will," she said, gathering the folder and her satchel. "Lead the way, Detective Thornton." The safe house, as Detective Thornton called it, turned out to be a modest townhouse in the North End, far from the fashionable districts where Catherine typically worked. The building sat wedged between a bakery and a tailor's shop, its brick facade weathered but respectable. James led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor, where he unlocked a door to reveal a surprisingly comfortable set of rooms. "This belongs to my sister, Mrs. Rebecca Crane," James explained as he lit the gas lamps, filling the parlor with warm light. "She and her husband are visiting family in New York for the next 3 weeks. You will be safe here, Miss Hayes. No one from your professional circles would think to search for you in this neighborhood." Catherine looked around the cozy space, taking in the floral wallpaper, the well-worn furniture, and the photographs on the mantelpiece showing a handsome couple with 2 small children. It felt like a home, warm and lived in, so different from her sparse boarding house room. "I cannot possibly impose on your sister's hospitality without her knowledge, Detective." "James," he corrected gently, removing his damp coat and hanging it on a hook by the door. "If we are to work together on this matter, Miss Hayes, formality seems rather unnecessary, and Rebecca would be the first to offer shelter to someone in need. She is quite possibly the kindest person I know." He paused, a fond smile crossing his features. "Also the most stubborn, but that is a family trait." Despite the gravity of her situation, Catherine found herself smiling. "Very well, James. Then you must call me Catherine." She set down her satchel and removed her own sodden coat, suddenly aware of how thoroughly drenched she was. Her dress clung to her uncomfortably, and she could feel water still dripping from her hair. James seemed to notice her discomfort. "Rebecca is approximately your height and build. I am certain she would not mind if you borrowed some dry clothing. The bedroom is through that door. I will put on a pot of coffee while you change. We have much to discuss, and it promises to be a long night." Catherine found herself in a charming bedroom, decorated in shades of cream and pale blue. She quickly shed her wet garments and discovered a wardrobe filled with practical but well-made dresses. She selected a simple navy blue day dress with modest trim, marveling at how precisely it fit her figure. When she emerged, her wet hair pinned up as neatly as she could manage without her usual implements, she found James had been true to his word. The aroma of fresh coffee filled the parlor, and he had spread the documents from the folder across the dining table. "Much better," James observed, gesturing for her to join him. He had removed his suit jacket and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing strong forearms. Catherine found herself noticing the way the lamplight caught the planes of his face, the intensity with which he studied the papers before him. There was something deeply attractive about a man so completely focused on pursuing justice. "I have been examining these documents more carefully," James said as Catherine sat across from him, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "The conspiracy is even more extensive than I initially realized. This harbor development project represents millions of dollars, Catherine. The amount of money being siphoned off through fraudulent contracts and inferior materials could fund a small army." Catherine sipped her coffee, grateful for its warmth. "But surely if we take this evidence to the police commissioner, he will have no choice but to investigate." James's expression grew troubled. "Under normal circumstances, yes. But look at this name here." He pointed to an entry on one of the ledger pages. "Commissioner Patrick Donnelly received a payment of $5,000 last April, listed here as consultation fee. And here, Captain Richard Brennan of the Harbor Division, another $3,000. Catherine felt her stomach sink. "You mean the police themselves are involved?" "Some of them, certainly," James confirmed grimly. "Which means we cannot simply march into headquarters with this evidence. We need to be strategic, to identify who can be trusted and who cannot. We need allies, Catherine, and we need to build an airtight case before we make any move." He looked up at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "This will take time. Days, perhaps even weeks. Are you prepared for that?" "I have little choice," Catherine replied, though her voice remained steady. "The moment Mr. Morrison discovers that file is missing, I become a target. My only option is to see this through to the end." She paused, studying James's face. "But I must ask, Detective James, why are you helping me? You do not know me. For all you know, I could have stolen these documents for my own gain." James was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of old pain. 3 years ago, my partner, Detective Samuel Morris, uncovered evidence of corruption in the dock workers' union. He came to me with his findings, asked for my help in investigating further. I told him to take it to the captain to follow proper procedure. James's jaw tightened. 2 days later, Samuel was found dead in an alley, officially ruled a robbery gone wrong. But his widow told me he had been receiving threats, had told her he was afraid someone in the department was working against him. I did not listen. I did not help him when he needed it most. Catherine reached across the table instinctively, placing her hand over James's. "That was not your fault. You could not have known." "Perhaps not," James acknowledged, but his eyes remained haunted. "But I have lived with that failure every day since. When I saw you tonight, Catherine, standing in that alley looking terrified and alone, clutching something you clearly should not possess, I knew I was being given a second chance. A chance to do what I should have done for Samuel. I will not fail again." The intensity of his gaze made Catherine's breath catch. There was something profound passing between them in this moment. A connection forged not just by circumstance, but by shared purpose and mutual understanding. She realized her hand was still resting on his, and she should probably remove it, but somehow she could not bring herself to break the contact. "Then we will see this through together," Catherine said softly, "for Samuel, and for all the others whose names appear on that terrible list." James turned his hand over, gently clasping hers. His touch was warm and solid, anchoring her in the midst of all the uncertainty. "Together," he agreed. They spent the next several hours examining every document in minute detail, with James making careful notes in a leather-bound journal he produced from his coat pocket. Catherine proved to have an excellent memory for the office procedures at Morrison and Blackwell, providing context that helped James understand the significance of certain transactions and dates. "You have quite a mind for investigation," James observed at one point, looking at Catherine with undisguised admiration. "Have you ever considered detective work as a profession?" Catherine laughed, though the sound carried a note of bitterness. "Women are not permitted to be police detectives, James. We are deemed too delicate for such rough work. The most I could hope for in the legal profession is to remain a filing clerk for the rest of my working years, organizing documents for men who earn 5 times my salary." "That is a waste of considerable talent," James said firmly, "and terribly unjust. You have already demonstrated more courage and quick thinking than many officers I have worked with." His words warmed Catherine more than she cared to admit. She had grown accustomed to being overlooked, dismissed as merely a clerk, a woman whose opinions held little weight. To have someone, especially someone as capable as James Thornton, recognize her abilities felt like a revelation. As the night deepened toward morning, they developed a plan. James would return to the police station as usual, careful to give no indication that anything was amiss. He would quietly investigate which of his fellow officers could be trusted, while also beginning to build connections with honest city officials who might be willing to help once they had sufficient evidence. Catherine would remain in hiding, using her knowledge of Morrison and Blackwell's filing systems to create a comprehensive map of the conspiracy, identifying all the key players and their roles. "We need more than just financial records," James explained as they organized the documents back into the folder. "We need testimony, witnesses who can confirm what these papers suggest. I will begin discreetly interviewing workers at the harbor construction site, see if any of them are willing to speak about irregularities they may have witnessed." "That could be dangerous," Catherine warned. "If word gets back to the wrong people that you are asking questions, I will be careful," James assured her. "I have conducted many sensitive investigations, Catherine. I know how to be subtle." He smiled slightly. "Besides, I have excellent motivation to stay safe now. Someone needs to ensure you remain protected." Dawn was breaking over Boston when James finally prepared to leave, the gray morning light filtering through the windows. Catherine walked him to the door, suddenly reluctant to see him go. In the space of one night, this man had become her ally, her protector, and something more she was not quite ready to name. "I will return this evening with food and any news I uncover," James said, shrugging into his now dry coat. "Do not answer the door for anyone else and stay away from the windows as much as possible. If there is any emergency, any trouble at all, there is a police whistle in the desk drawer in the bedroom. Use it, and I will hear it. I will be patrolling this neighborhood periodically throughout the day." "James," Catherine said as he reached for the door handle. He turned back to her, and she found herself stepping closer, moved by an impulse she did not fully understand. "Thank you for believing me, for helping me, for not thinking I was simply a foolish woman who had gotten herself into trouble through her own carelessness." James reached out and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, the gesture both tender and surprisingly intimate. "You are many things, Catherine Hayes, but foolish is not among them. You are brave and principled and remarkably intelligent. Any trouble you find yourself in is born of those qualities, not despite them." Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks at his words, at the softness in his eyes. "You barely know me, Detective." "Perhaps," James agreed, "but I am an excellent judge of character. It is what makes me good at my profession." His hand lingered near her face for a moment longer before he drew back, clearing his throat. "I should go before the neighborhood fully awakens. Rest today, Catherine. You have earned it." After he left, Catherine stood by the door for several minutes, her hand pressed to the spot where his fingers had brushed her cheek. She felt changed somehow, as if the night had transformed her into someone new. Not just a filing clerk anymore, but an investigator, a seeker of justice, a woman engaged in important and dangerous work. And perhaps, she admitted to herself as she finally turned away from the door, a woman who was beginning to develop feelings for a certain gray-eyed detective who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was saying. Catherine spent the day as James had instructed, staying away from the windows and using her time to create detailed notes about everything she remembered from her years at Morrison and Blackwell. She sketched out organizational charts showing which lawyers handled which clients, which clerks had access to which files. She listed dates when she had noticed unusual activity, Late-night meetings, locked doors, whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. The work kept her mind occupied, but she found her thoughts returning repeatedly to James. The way he had looked at her across the table, his eyes reflecting the lamplight, the warmth of his hand clasping hers, the gentleness with which he had touched her hair. Catherine had never considered herself a romantic woman. Her practical nature and the demands of supporting herself had left little room for such fancies, but there was something about James Thornton that called to something deep within her, a recognition that felt almost like coming home. When evening arrived and she heard his distinctive knock at the door, 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more, Catherine's heart leaped in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. James entered carrying a basket of food from the bakery downstairs and a leather satchel that proved to contain more documents. "I have had a productive day," he announced, his eyes bright with the excitement of the hunt. "And I have found us an ally, Catherine. Someone who may be the key to everything." As they shared a simple supper of bread, cheese, and cold chicken, James explained, "I spoke with a construction foreman at the harbor site, a man named Patrick Murphy. He has been increasingly troubled by what he has witnessed. Inferior materials being used, inspections falsified, workers ordered to cut corners that compromise safety. When I approached him carefully, with sympathy rather than accusation, he broke down and told me everything." "Will he testify?" Catherine asked eagerly. "He is afraid, understandably, but I believe I can convince him, especially if we can guarantee his protection." James pulled out a set of new documents from his satchel. "He also provided me with these, his own records of materials ordered versus materials actually delivered to the site. They corroborate perfectly with the financial documents you discovered." Catherine examined the new papers, her mind already working to integrate this information with what they already knew. "This is excellent, James. With Murphy's testimony and these records combined with the financial ledgers, we are building a case that cannot be easily dismissed." They worked late into the night once more, and Catherine noticed how natural it felt to be partnered with James, how easily they fell into a rhythm of collaboration. He respected her insights, built upon her observations, and treated her as a true equal in their investigation. It was intoxicating, this feeling of being valued not for her appearance or her domestic skills, but for her mind and her courage. At one point, they both reached for the same document, and their hands collided. James caught her fingers in his, and instead of immediately releasing them, he held on, looking at her with an expression that made Catherine's pulse race. "I find myself thinking," James said quietly, "that of all the strange and dangerous circumstances that brought us together, I cannot quite bring myself to regret them. Is that terribly inappropriate of me?" Catherine's breath caught, but she did not pull her hand away. "No more inappropriate than my own thoughts on the matter, I suspect." The confession hung between them like a delicate thread, fragile and precious. James's thumb traced a gentle circle on the back of Catherine's hand, and she found herself leaning slightly closer, drawn by the warmth in his eyes and the unspoken promise she saw there. But before either of them could speak further, a sharp sound from the street below shattered the moment. The unmistakable crack of breaking glass followed by angry shouting. James was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with the practiced caution of a trained officer. He peered carefully through the curtain, his body tense. A dispute at the tavern across the street. Nothing to concern us. But when he turned back to Catherine, the spell had been broken. He cleared his throat, suddenly formal again. "It grows late. I should leave you to rest." Catherine felt the loss of the moment keenly, but she understood. They were in the midst of a dangerous investigation, one that required their full attention and clear heads. There would be time later, she told herself, once this was finished and they were both safe, if they survived. "Before you go," Catherine said, gathering her courage, "there is something I need to tell you about Mr. Morrison. Something I witnessed 3 months ago that I did not understand at the time, but now makes terrible sense." James sat back down, his detective's instincts immediately engaged. "Tell me everything." Catherine closed her eyes, calling up the memory. It was late evening, past the hour when the office typically closes. I had stayed to finish organizing a particularly difficult set of files. I heard voices coming from Mr. Morrison's private office, angry voices. I knew I should not listen, but something in the tone made me pause. One of the voices belonged to Morrison, but the other was someone I did not recognize, someone with a rough accent, not educated like our usual clients. What were they saying? James leaned forward, his attention completely focused on her. The other man was threatening Morrison, saying something about the arrangement and how Morrison had better keep his people in line or there would be consequences. Morrison sounded frightened, James. I had never heard him sound that way before. He is always so controlled, so commanding. But in that moment, he was afraid. Catherine opened her eyes, meeting James's gaze. The other man said something else, something that chilled me even then. He said, "We both know what happens to loose ends, Morrison. Remember Inspector Holloway." James's expression darkened. Holloway was the harbor inspector who died 2 years ago, the one listed in that document as an addressed problem. Yes, Catherine confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. At the time, I convinced myself I had misheard, that it was none of my concern. But now I realize Morrison is not the mastermind of this conspiracy. He is merely a puppet, and someone else is pulling the strings. Someone dangerous enough to make even Marcus Morrison afraid. James was quiet for a long moment, his analytical mind clearly working through the implications. This changes things, Catherine. If Morrison is being coerced, he might be convinced to turn witness against the true architects of this scheme. But we would need leverage, something to offer him in exchange for his cooperation. Protection? Catherine suggested. If he testifies, he would be in as much danger as we are. More, perhaps, James agreed, but also the possibility of leniency in his own prosecution. If he can demonstrate he was operating under duress, a judge might be sympathetic. He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture Catherine was beginning to recognize as his habit when deep in thought. I need to identify this other man, the one making threats. Did you see him when he left Morrison's office? Catherine shook her head regretfully. I hid in the file room until I heard them leave. I was too frightened to risk being discovered eavesdropping. That was wise, James assured her. Your instincts for self-preservation are sound, Catherine. It is one of the reasons you are still alive. He stood, gathering his coat once more. Tomorrow I will speak with some of my contacts in the criminal underworld, informants who owe me favors. If there is a man in Boston who specializes in intimidating respectable lawyers, they will know his name. After James departed, Catherine found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. She stood at the bedroom window, careful to remain hidden behind the curtain, and watched the gas lamps flickering in the street below. Somewhere out there, powerful men were conspiring to maintain their corrupt empire. They had killed before and would not hesitate to kill again. She should be terrified, and part of her was, but another part felt strangely alive, energized by the danger and the purpose and the presence of James Thornton in her life. She thought about the moment they had shared earlier, the way he had held her hand, the softness in his eyes when he had confessed his pleasure at their unlikely meeting. Catherine had never believed in fate or destiny, had always considered such notions the province of silly romantic novels, but she could not deny the feeling that she and James were meant to find each other, that all the circumstances of her life had been leading her to that rainy evening when a tall detective had found her hiding in an alley. The next day passed with agonizing slowness. Catherine continued her documentation work, but her mind kept drifting to James, wondering what he was discovering, whether he was safe. The autumn sun tracked across the sky, and with each passing hour, her anxiety grew. What if something had happened to him? What if he had been discovered asking dangerous questions? When evening finally arrived and she heard his knock at the door, Catherine had to restrain herself from flinging it open immediately. She forced herself to wait, to verify the correct pattern of knocks before admitting him. But the moment she saw his face, she knew something significant had occurred. I know who he is, James said without preamble, his eyes blazing with triumph and anger. The man who threatened Morrison. His name is Vincent Cassidy, and he is the enforcer for the entire operation. He handles the intimidation, the threats, and according to my sources, the occasional murder when someone becomes too problematic. Catherine felt ice slide down her spine. And who does Cassidy work for? Who is truly behind all of this? James's expression turned grim. That is where the trail becomes complicated. Cassidy reports to a man named Thomas Whitmore, a shipping magnate with interests throughout the harbor. But Whitmore himself appears to be partnered with several others. City councilmen, business owners, even a state senator. It is not a simple hierarchy, Catherine. It is a web, with multiple powerful men sharing in the profits and the guilt. Then how do we bring them all down? Catherine asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. We need someone from inside the conspiracy to testify, someone high enough to implicate the others. James explained. He moved to the table where their documents were spread out, adding new pages to the collection. I believe Morrison is our best option. He is clearly afraid of Cassidy, which means he is not a willing participant. If we can approach him correctly, offer him both protection and the possibility of redemption, he might be persuaded to cooperate. That is an enormous risk, Catherine said slowly. If Morrison refuses, if he warns the others that we are investigating them, then we will be in grave danger, yes, James acknowledged. He turned to face her, and Catherine saw the weight of responsibility in his eyes. But Catherine, we are already in danger. From the moment you discovered that file, from the moment you chose to take it, rather than ignore what you had seen, you became a target. Our only path to safety now is to expose this conspiracy so thoroughly that the conspirators have no choice but to face justice. Otherwise, you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, wondering when Cassidy or someone like him will come for you. Catherine knew he was right, but the reality of their situation felt suddenly overwhelming. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I have been trying not to think about that, about what happens if we fail, if they find me before we can stop them. James knelt beside her chair, taking both her hands in his. The gesture was intimate, comforting, and Catherine found herself clinging to his steady presence. Look at me, Catherine. She raised her eyes to his. I will not let them harm you. I give you my word, on my honor as a detective and as a man. Whatever happens, whatever we must face, we face it together. You are not alone in this. How can you promise such a thing? Catherine whispered. They have killed before, James. What makes us different from Inspector Holloway, or that accountant whose house burned, or any of the others? What makes us different is that we know what we are facing, James replied firmly. We are not working alone in the dark, making accusations without proof. We have documentation, we have witnesses, and we have each other. Most importantly, we have something they do not expect, determination that matches their ruthlessness. They have grown comfortable in their corruption, complacent in their power. That will be their downfall. Catherine studied his face, seeing the absolute conviction there, the unwavering resolve. She realized in that moment that she trusted this man completely, not just with her safety, but with something far more precious, her heart. The knowledge should have frightened her, but instead it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When do we approach Morrison? She asked quietly. Tomorrow night, James decided. I will bring him here. Tell him I need to discuss a confidential matter related to the harbor investigation. Once he arrives and sees you, sees the documents, he will understand that we have him cornered. Then we make our offer. Full cooperation in exchange for protection and consideration from the prosecutor. And if he refuses? James's jaw tightened. Then we take what evidence we have directly to the district attorney. It may not be enough to convict everyone involved, but it will be enough to start a public investigation. Once this becomes public knowledge, the conspirators will be too busy defending themselves to worry about eliminating witnesses. They spent the evening refining their approach, practicing what they would say to Morrison, anticipating his objections and preparing counter-arguments. As the night deepened, Catherine found herself increasingly aware of James's presence, the way he moved, the sound of his voice, the occasional brush of his hand against hers as they worked. The attraction she had been trying to ignore was becoming impossible to deny. At one point, James looked up from the document he was reading and caught her staring at him. A slow smile spread across his face. What are you thinking about with such intensity, Miss Hayes? Catherine felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to look away. I was thinking that I am grateful it was you who found me that night in the alley. I cannot imagine trusting anyone else with all of this. James set down the paper he held and moved closer to her. I am grateful as well, though I wish you had stumbled upon some less dangerous secret. Something that would not put you in such peril. If the secret had been less dangerous, we might never have had reason to spend these evenings together, Catherine pointed out. I would have remained simply another filing clerk in the city, and you would have continued your work, and our paths would never have crossed in any meaningful way. That would have been a tragedy, James said softly. He reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle but sure. Catherine, I know this is neither the time nor the place, and I know I have no right to speak of such things when our future is so uncertain. But I find I cannot remain silent any longer. These past few days with you have been extraordinary. Not despite the danger, but because of how you have faced it. with courage and intelligence and such remarkable grace. You have made me feel things I had not thought to feel again, made me hope for possibilities I had long since dismissed as impossible for a man in my profession. Catherine's heart was pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. What kind of possibilities? The possibility of partnership, true partnership, with someone who understands the work I do and does not shy away from it. The possibility of love that is built not just on attraction, though I confess I find you extraordinarily beautiful, but on mutual respect and shared purpose. James paused, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. The possibility of a future that includes you in every aspect of my life. Catherine could barely breathe. No man had ever spoken to her this way, with such honesty and vulnerability. James, You need not respond now, James interrupted gently. I know I am asking you to consider tying yourself to a police detective with a modest salary and a dangerous occupation. I am not a wealthy man, Catherine. I cannot offer you luxury or social prominence. All I can offer is my absolute devotion, my protection, and the promise that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. Tears pricked at Catherine's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. You foolish man, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Do you truly not see? I am a filing clerk with no family, no fortune, no prospects beyond a lifetime of organizing other people's documents. The danger I face now is a direct result of my own actions, my own choice to take those papers. If anyone is unworthy in this partnership, it is I. Never say that, James commanded, his voice fierce. He cupped her face in his hands, his eyes blazing. You are the bravest person I have ever met. When you saw injustice, you did not look away. You did not tell yourself it was none of your concern. You took action, even knowing the risk. That is not unworthiness, Catherine. That is heroism. Catherine could not help herself any longer. She closed the small distance between them and kissed him, pouring all her fear and hope and growing love into the contact. James made a small sound of surprise, then gathered her close, his arms wrapping around her as he returned the kiss with equal fervor. It was Catherine's first kiss, and it was everything she had never dared to dream. Tender and passionate, careful and consuming all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, James rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the moment I saw you standing in that alley, looking like a fierce little warrior prepared to defend her treasure. Catherine laughed, the sound breaking some of the tension. I must have looked utterly terrified. Terrified, yes, but also determined. It was quite captivating. James pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Promise me something, Catherine. Promise me that whatever happens tomorrow with Morrison, whatever dangers we must face, you will not give up. Promise me you will fight to survive, because I very much need you to have a future so that I might be part of it. I promise, Catherine whispered against his chest, her arms tight around him. If you make me the same promise. You have my word, James replied solemnly. We will see this through together, and when it is over, when we have brought these criminals to justice and ensured your safety, I intend to court you properly, Miss Hayes, with flowers and theater tickets and walks through the public garden. I intend to show all of Boston what a remarkable woman you are. I would like that very much, Catherine said, tilting her face up to his. Though I confess, these evenings here, working beside you, learning to trust you, this has been the finest courtship I could imagine. James smiled and kissed her again, more gently this time, but no less meaningfully. When he finally forced himself to leave for the night, Catherine stood at the door long after he had gone, her fingers pressed to her lips, marveling at how completely her life had transformed in just a few short days. Tomorrow, they would confront Morrison. Tomorrow, the real danger would begin. But tonight, Catherine allowed herself to hope, for justice, for safety, and for a future with a gray-eyed detective who had seen past her station and her circumstances to recognize the woman she truly was. The following evening arrived with an unseasonable chill, as if autumn had decided to give way early to winter's approach. Catherine stood by the parlor window, watching the street below with mounting anxiety. James had sent word earlier that he had successfully convinced Morrison to meet with him at 8 o'clock, citing urgent matters regarding a harbor investigation that required the lawyer's immediate attention. Now, as the church bells tolled the hour, Catherine wondered if they had made a terrible mistake. He will come, James said quietly from behind her, as if reading her thoughts. He had arrived an hour earlier to prepare, and they had arranged the documents on the table in careful order, creating an undeniable narrative of corruption and murder. Morrison is too curious, too arrogant to resist the lure of learning what evidence might exist against his operations. That arrogance will be his undoing. Catherine turned to face him, drawing strength from his calm presence. He looked every inch the professional detective this evening, his suit immaculate, his bearing authoritative, but when his eyes met hers, she saw the warmth there, the personal concern that went beyond duty. They had not spoken directly of the previous night's confessions and kisses, but the knowledge of their feelings for each other hummed between them like an electric current. A sharp knock at the door made Catherine start. James squeezed her hand briefly before moving to answer it. "Remember, stay calm and let me lead the conversation initially. We need to assess his state of mind before we reveal everything." Marcus Morrison cut an imposing figure as he entered the apartment, his expensive overcoat and silk top hat speaking of wealth and privilege. He was a man in his late 40s, with iron-gray hair and sharp features that suggested intelligence and ruthlessness in equal measure. But when his eyes fell upon Catherine standing in the parlor, his face went absolutely white. "Miss Hayes," he breathed, his voice strangled. "What is the meaning of this?" "Detective Thornton, I was led to believe this meeting concerned official police business, not—" "It does concern official business, Mr. Morrison," James interrupted smoothly, closing the door behind the lawyer and positioning himself between Morrison and the exit. "The most official business imaginable, in fact. Please, sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." Morrison's eyes darted between James and Catherine, calculation and fear warring in his expression. "I do not understand. Miss Hayes is my employee, a filing clerk. What possible connection could she have to a harbor investigation?" "She has every connection," Catherine said, finding her voice despite her pounding heart. "Because 3 days ago, Mr. Morrison, I accidentally discovered something in the office basement. Something I believe you have been searching for rather frantically since my sudden disappearance." She moved to the table and placed her hand on the folder containing the damning documents. Morrison's eyes locked onto it, and Catherine saw the exact moment he recognized what it was. All the color drained from his face, and he swayed slightly, gripping the back of a chair for support. "That file should not exist," Morrison whispered. "It was supposed to have been destroyed months ago." Where did you find it?" "In a false bottom drawer in the cabinet marked Deceased Estates Archived," Catherine replied. "A clever hiding place, really. Who would think to search through records of the dead for evidence of ongoing crimes? But the drawer stuck when I tried to open it, and when I forced it, the false bottom gave way." James gestured to the chair Morrison still clutched. "Please sit, Mr. Morrison. As Miss Hayes indicated, we have much to discuss, and I believe you will want to be seated for this conversation." Morrison sank into the chair like a puppet with cut strings. His hands trembled as he removed his hat and set it on the table. "You have read the contents of that folder." It was not a question, but James answered anyway. "We have. Every page, every entry, every name on that rather extensive list of addressed problems. We know about the harbor development fraud, the bribery, the falsified inspections, the inferior materials being used while contractors bill for superior ones. We know about the money flowing through your firm to various city officials and police officers, and we know about the murders, Mr. Morrison. Inspector Halloway, Accountant Reeves, journalist Patterson, and at least 6 others who died because they discovered what was happening." Morrison's face crumpled, and for a moment, Catherine almost felt sorry for him. He looked like a man carrying an unbearable weight, one that had finally grown too heavy to bear. "You do not understand," he said hoarsely. "I never wanted any of this. When Thomas Whitmore first approached me 5 years ago with his business proposition, it seemed like a simple matter of creative accounting, nothing more. A few invoices adjusted here and there, some payments redirected through my trust accounts. I was compensated generously, and I told myself no one was really being harmed. But people were harmed," Catherine said firmly. "The city of Boston is being cheated of millions of dollars. Workers at the harbor site are endangered by substandard materials and safety practices. And those who tried to expose the truth were murdered, Mr. Morrison. Murdered by men acting on orders that came through you." "Not through me," Morrison's voice cracked with desperation. "I swear to you I never ordered any violence. That was all Whitmore and his enforcer, Vincent Cassidy. When I learned what they had done to Inspector Halloway, I tried to withdraw from the arrangement. That is when Cassidy paid me a visit. Morrison's hand unconsciously moved to his ribs, as if remembering old pain. He made it very clear that I was not permitted to leave. He said I knew too much, that I was complicit in everything that had happened, and if I did not continue to cooperate, I would be the next addressed problem. He also threatened my daughter, gentlemen, my Emily, who is only 16 years old. He described her daily routine, her school, her friends. He told me how easy it would be for accidents to happen to young girls who walked alone. Catherine saw James's expression harden at the mention of threats against a child. "Where is your daughter now, Mr. Morrison?" "At boarding school in Connecticut," Morrison replied. "I sent her away 3 months ago, told her mother it was for better educational opportunities. But in truth, I wanted her as far from Boston as possible, somewhere Cassidy could not easily reach her." He looked up at James with haunted eyes. "You must understand, Detective. I am not a violent man. I am not even particularly brave. But I am a father, and I would do anything, accept any guilt, to protect my child." James was quiet for a long moment, and Catherine could see him weighing Morrison's words, assessing the truth of them. Finally, he pulled out a chair and sat across from the lawyer, his posture less aggressive than before. "I do understand, Mr. Morrison, but your desire to protect your daughter does not absolve you of responsibility for what has occurred. You may not have ordered the murders, but your participation in this conspiracy enabled them. Your silence allowed them to continue." "I know," Morrison whispered, his voice breaking. "I know, and I have lived with that knowledge every day. I see their faces in my dreams. Holloway, Reeves, all of them. I'm already damned, Detective. My soul is forfeit. But Emily, she is innocent in all of this. If I am arrested, if this becomes public, the scandal will destroy her. She will be marked forever as the daughter of a criminal, a conspirator to murder." "There may be another way," James said carefully. Catherine watched him, understanding that this was the crucial moment, the pivot point upon which everything depended. "A way for you to atone, at least partially, for your role in these crimes. A way that might also provide protection for your daughter and yourself from Whitmore and Cassidy." Morrison looked up sharply, hope and suspicion mingling in his expression. "What are you proposing?" "Full cooperation," James stated bluntly. "You testify against Whitmore, Cassidy, and every other conspirator involved in this scheme. You provide us with all the documentation you possess, all the details of how the operation functions, every name of every person who participated. You hold nothing back, Mr. Morrison. In exchange, I will personally guarantee your safety and your daughter's safety. We will place you both in protective custody until the trials are complete. Furthermore, I will recommend to the district attorney that you be granted consideration for your cooperation. Reduced charges, perhaps even immunity if your testimony proves sufficient to convict the primary architects of this conspiracy." "And if I refuse?" Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Catherine stepped forward, her voice firm. "Then Detective Thornton takes this evidence directly to the district attorney tomorrow morning. You will be arrested and charged alongside Whitmore and the others. Your daughter will indeed bear the scandal of your crimes, and you will have no protection from Cassidy, who will undoubtedly view you as a loose end to be eliminated before you can testify. You will spend whatever time remains to you in fear, and when Cassidy or one of his associates finally reaches you, whether in a prison cell or on the street, you will die knowing you could have done the right thing but chose cowardice instead." Morrison flinched at her harsh words, but Catherine felt no sympathy. This man had enabled murder, had enriched himself on corruption, while innocent people died. If fear for his daughter was the only thing that could compel him to justice, then she would use that fear without hesitation. "How can you guarantee our safety?" Morrison asked James desperately. "Cassidy has connections throughout the police department. That ledger you possess proves it. Officers on the payroll, entire divisions compromised. If I agree to testify, how do I know I will not simply be killed while in your protective custody?" "Because I have been preparing for this possibility," James replied. He pulled several documents from his own satchel and laid them on the table. "Over the past 2 days, I have quietly identified which officers can be trusted and which cannot. I have also made contact with federal authorities, Treasury agents who have been investigating financial irregularities in Boston's municipal contracts. They have jurisdiction that supersedes local police corruption, and they are very interested in what we have discovered. Your protection, and your daughter's, will be handled by federal marshals, not by compromised local officers." Catherine felt a surge of admiration for James's thoroughness. He had been planning this, preparing contingencies, even while she had believed they were simply gathering evidence. He had thought several moves ahead, anticipating exactly this situation. Morrison stared at the federal documents, his hands shaking. If I do this, I am signing my own death warrant. Even with protection, even with new identities after the trials, Whitmore and Cassidy have long memories and longer reaches. I will spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Yes, James agreed bluntly. You will, but you will be alive, and so will your daughter. And you will be able to look at yourself in the mirror knowing that you finally did the right thing, that you helped bring justice for all those who died because of this conspiracy. That may not seem like much comfort now, but in the years to come, it may mean everything. The silence stretched out, taut as a wire. Catherine found herself holding her breath, watching Morrison's face as he grappled with the impossible choice before him. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lawyer's shoulders sagged in defeat. Very well, Morrison said quietly. I will cooperate. I will testify. But I want your promise, Detective Thornton, your personal word of honor, that my daughter will be protected. Whatever happens to me, Emily must be kept safe. You have my word, James said solemnly, extending his hand across the table. As a detective and as a man of honor, your daughter will be protected. Morrison shook his hand, sealing the agreement. Then, to Catherine's surprise, the lawyer turned to her. Miss Hayes, I owe you an apology. In my fear and desperation, I never considered how my actions might affect my employees. When I discovered the file was missing, when I realized you had disappeared, I knew immediately what must have happened. I should have warned you, should have found some way to protect you from what you had discovered. Instead, I reported the theft to Whitmore, and he sent Cassidy to find you. If the detective had not found you first, if you had not had his protection, Morrison's voice broke. I am sorrier than I can express. Catherine felt her anger toward Morrison soften slightly, though it did not disappear entirely. Thank you for the apology, Mr. Morrison. I accept it, though I cannot forget what your choices have cost. But if you truly wish to make amends, then help us end this. Help us ensure that no one else dies because of this conspiracy. I will, Morrison promised. I have copies of additional documents hidden in my home safe, records that detail every transaction, every payment, every meeting over the past 5 years. I also have a journal in which I documented everything, insurance against the day when Whitmore might decide I knew too much. I will give you all of it. James immediately began making notes. We need to retrieve those documents tonight, before anyone realizes you have turned. Can you access them without arousing suspicion? Morrison nodded. My wife is visiting her sister in Providence for the week. The house is empty except for our housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who retires early. I can enter through the servants' door and retrieve everything from my study without being observed. Then that is what we shall do, James decided. He looked at Catherine. You will remain here where it is safe. Morrison and I will retrieve the documents, and then I will take him directly to the federal authorities. By morning, we will have enough evidence and testimony to begin arrests. No, Catherine said firmly. I am coming with you. James' expression turned stubborn. Catherine, it is too dangerous. If something goes wrong, you will need a witness, someone who cannot be accused of coercing testimony or fabricating evidence, Catherine interrupted. I have been part of this investigation from the beginning, James. I will see it through to the end. For a moment she thought he would argue further, but then understanding dawned in his eyes. He recognized the same determination that had led her to take the file in the first place, the same courage that had allowed her to trust him with everything. This was not a battle he could win, nor should he try. Very well, James conceded, but you stay close to me at all times, and at the first sign of trouble, you follow my instructions without question. Agreed? Agreed, Catherine promised. The three of them left the apartment together, a strange alliance forged by necessity and desperation. Morrison's home was located in the fashionable Back Bay district, a stately brownstone that spoke of wealth and respectability. The irony was not lost on Catherine, that such corruption could flourish behind such a respectable facade. They approached cautiously, Morrison leading them through the narrow alley that ran behind the row of houses. The night was dark, with clouds obscuring the moon, and Catherine was grateful for James's steady presence beside her. He kept one hand on her elbow, guiding her over the uneven ground. while his other hand rested inside his coat where she knew he carried his service revolver. Morrison produced a key and unlocked the servants' entrance, and they slipped inside like thieves in the night. The house was silent and dark, smelling faintly of beeswax and old wood. Morrison lit a single candle, shielding the flame with his hand as he led them through the kitchen and down a hallway to his study. The study was a gentleman's retreat, all dark wood paneling and leather-bound books. Morrison went directly to a painting on the wall, a rather mediocre landscape of the harbor, and swung it aside to reveal a wall safe. His hands trembled as he worked the combination, and Catherine found herself holding her breath, every nerve alert for any sound that might indicate they were not as alone as they believed. The safe opened with a soft click, and Morrison began removing documents, stacking them on his desk. There were ledgers, journals, contracts, correspondence, a mountain of evidence documenting 5 years of corruption. Catherine moved closer, helping to organize the papers, when suddenly James grabbed her arm. "Get down," he hissed, pulling both her and Morrison to the floor just as the study door crashed open. Vincent Cassidy stood framed in the doorway, and he was not alone. 2 other men flanked him, all 3 holding revolvers that gleamed dully in the candlelight. Cassidy was a large man, built like a dock worker, with a flat, brutal face and cold eyes that held no mercy whatsoever. "Well, well," Cassidy said, his voice carrying a rough Irish accent. "Isn't this a cozy little gathering? Morrison, you disappoint me. Here I was thinking you'd finally found your spine, but instead you're betraying your partners. That's very unfortunate." James had already drawn his own revolver, but Catherine saw the calculation in his eyes. 3 armed men against 1, with 2 civilians to protect. The odds were not favorable. "Vincent Cassidy," James said calmly, as if confronting armed criminals in darkened rooms was an everyday occurrence. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and murder. Order your men to lower their weapons." Cassidy laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "I don't think so, Detective. You see, I've been watching Morrison's house. Had a feeling he might try something stupid after he got your message about meeting tonight. And look what we found. A treacherous lawyer, a meddling detective, and our missing filing clerk. This solves several problems at once. You cannot kill a police officer and expect to escape justice," James said. But Catherine heard the tension in his voice. He was searching for an angle, a way out of this trap. "Can't I?" Cassidy replied. "Who's going to investigate? Half the department is on Whitmore's payroll. The ones who aren't will be told this was a tragic situation. A detective who got in over his head, broke into a lawyer's home with his accomplice, and was killed defending himself. Morrison will back up that story, won't you, Morrison?" Morrison had gone absolutely gray, and Catherine realized he was weighing his options, trying to decide if betraying them would save his own life. She saw the moment he made his choice, saw his spine stiffen with a courage she had not believed he possessed. "No," Morrison said clearly, "I will not. I am done being your puppet, Cassidy. I am done enabling murder and corruption. Whatever you do to me, my testimony is already secured. I have written everything down, sent copies to multiple parties. If I die, it will only confirm the truth of what I have revealed." It was a bluff. Catherine knew Morrison had done no such thing, but it was a brave one. Cassidy's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You're lying. You're not that clever, Morrison." "Try me," Morrison replied, rising to his feet despite James's hissed warning to stay down. "Go ahead and pull that trigger, Cassidy. Make me a martyr instead of a conspirator. See how well that works out for Whitmore and your entire operation." For a moment, Catherine thought Cassidy might shoot Morrison anyway. Consequences be damned. But then a new voice spoke from behind Cassidy's men. "I would not do that if I were you, gentlemen." Everyone turned to see Mrs. Chen, Morrison's elderly housekeeper, standing in the hallway. She held a shotgun with the comfortable familiarity of someone well acquainted with firearms, and it was pointed directly at Cassidy's back. "I may be old," she continued in her precise accented English, "but I am an excellent shot, and at this range I cannot possibly miss. Lower your weapons, or I will be forced to demonstrate." The tableau held for one breathless moment, and then chaos erupted. Cassidy spun toward Mrs. Chen, his revolver rising, and James fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, and Cassidy screamed, his weapon falling from his hand as James's bullet struck his shoulder. One of Cassidy's men dove toward Mrs. Chen, but the housekeeper proved true to her word. The shotgun boomed, and the man fell, clutching his leg. The third man, seeing his companions down and facing a detective and an armed housekeeper, made the wise decision to drop his weapon and raise his hands in surrender. Within moments, James had all three men under control, using rope from Morrison's desk drawer to secure their hands. Catherine found herself shaking uncontrollably, the reality of how close they had come to death finally hitting her. James came to her immediately, wrapping his arms around her. "You're safe," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe, Catherine. It is over." "Not quite over," Morrison said quietly. He had retrieved the documents from his safe and was holding them against his chest like a shield. "We still need to get this evidence to the federal authorities." "And so we shall," James agreed. He turned to Mrs. Chen, who had lowered her shotgun, but still maintained a watchful stance. "Mrs. Chen, you have my profound gratitude. That was extraordinarily brave." The housekeeper smiled slightly. "My father was a general in China before we came to America, Detective. He taught all his daughters to shoot. I told Mr. Morrison he should install better locks on his doors, but he never listened." She looked at her employer with an expression that mixed exasperation and fondness. "You have made very bad choices, Mr. Morrison, but tonight you made a good one. I hope you continue." "I intend to, Mrs. Chen," Morrison replied softly. "I swear to you I intend to." Within the hour, federal marshals arrived at the house, summoned by a message James had sent from Morrison's telephone. They took custody of Cassidy and his men, along with all the documents Morrison had provided. True to his word, James ensured that Morrison and his daughter were placed in protective custody, with arrangements made to bring Emily back from Connecticut under guard. As dawn broke over Boston, Catherine found herself standing with James on the steps of the federal building, watching as the first arrests of the conspiracy members began. The district attorney himself had taken charge of the case, and warrants were being executed across the city, at Whitmore's mansion, at the offices of corrupt contractors, even at the police headquarters where compromised officers were being quietly detained. "We did it," Catherine said wonderingly. "We actually did it." "You did it," James corrected, turning to face her. In the golden light of the rising sun, he looked tired but triumphant and unbearably handsome. "None of this would have been possible without your courage, Catherine. You could have destroyed that file or simply walked away. But you chose justice instead. You chose to fight." "I chose you," Catherine replied, reaching up to touch his face. "That night in the alley, I chose to trust you. That was the moment everything changed." James caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Then allow me to make another choice, here and now. Catherine Hayes, when this is all truly finished, when the trials are complete and the conspirators are behind bars and you are finally completely safe, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Catherine felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, James. I will marry you. I cannot imagine spending my life with anyone else." James pulled her close and kissed her there on the steps of the federal building, in full view of the marshals and attorneys and early morning passers-by. Catherine did not care who saw. She had faced death and corruption and the worst of human nature, and she had emerged victorious. She had found not just justice, but love, the kind of love that was built on trust and respect and shared purpose. In the weeks that followed, the conspiracy trials dominated Boston's newspapers. Morrison's testimony proved devastating to the defendants, and one by one, they were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms. Thomas Whitmore received 20 years, and Vincent Cassidy, facing additional charges for the attack on James and Catherine, received even longer. The harbor development project was halted and completely restructured under federal oversight, ensuring the safety of the workers and the integrity of the construction. Catherine found that her role in exposing the conspiracy had made her something of a celebrity, though she handled the attention with characteristic grace. More importantly, it had opened doors she had never imagined possible. The district attorney himself offered her a position as a legal investigator, recognizing her sharp mind and courageous spirit. It was unprecedented for a woman to hold such a position, but as the district attorney noted, Catherine Hayes had proven herself exceptional in every way. 6 months after that fateful night when she had stumbled upon a secret file, Catherine stood in a small church in the North End, wearing a simple but elegant ivory dress, her hand clasped in James Thornton's as they exchanged their wedding vows. Rebecca Crane served as her matron of honor, delighted to welcome the woman who had captured her brother's heart. Morrison attended the ceremony as well, having completed his testimony and begun the process of rebuilding his life and his relationship with his daughter. His presence was a reminder that redemption, while difficult, was always possible for those willing to seek it. As James slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger and declared his love before God and their gathered friends, Catherine reflected on the strange path that had brought them to this moment. She had stumbled upon a secret file and been told she knew too much. She had faced corruption and violence and the very real possibility of death. But she had also found her purpose, her courage, and the love of a remarkable man who saw her not as she appeared on the surface, but as she truly was, brave, intelligent, and worthy of standing beside him as an equal partner in all things. "I love you, Mrs. Thornton," James whispered as the minister pronounced them husband and wife. "And I love you, Mr. Thornton," Catherine replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Always and forever." They kissed then, sealing their union, and as they walked back down the aisle hand in hand, Catherine knew that this was not an ending, but a beginning. There would be more investigations, more criminals to catch, more injustices to fight, but they would face them together, partners in every sense of the word, their love strengthened by all they had overcome. The secret file that had nearly cost Catherine her life had instead given her everything she had never dared to hope for: purpose, respect, justice, and a love story for the ages. As she and James stepped out into the autumn sunshine, ready to begin their life together, Catherine sent up a silent prayer of gratitude. She had stumbled upon a secret, and in doing so, she had found her destiny.